I'm arriving here at the Daily News Building at 42nd Street, Manhattan, to be interviewed by Marvin Scott. It's a great show on WPIX-11. Marvin's an old friend. It's a great political interview whenever you go on with Marvin. He's an old veteran, knows the city, the state, Long Island's inside out, so I'm looking forward to it. Some tough issues on the State of the Union, Homeland Security, radicalization hearings. I'm sure Marvin will give me a run for my money, so let me head up there now.
Stop scrunching. I hit on the third try. I'm going under your nose.
Okay. You can sit. You can sit wherever you want to sit.
We sit on the pillow behind me? Or is it...
No, you can sit behind you if you...
Yeah, no. Right.
This morning, we're one-on-one with New York Congressman Peter King.
This is the Emmy Award-winning 11 News Close-Up with your host, Marvin Scott.
Good morning. He's just been sworn into his 9th term in Congress. With the Republican sweep last November, that gave them control of the House, and Peter King ascended to the chairmanship of the House Homeland Security Committee, making him one of the most powerful Republicans in Congress. We're pleased to welcome him back to Pix 11 News Close-Up. Thanks so much for coming in.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Next month, you are planning hearings. That's caused you stirred a lot of controversy. It's the radicalization, and you're only planning on calling Muslims, and people are making all kinds of accusations about you. First of all, what's the purpose of these meetings?
I believe that the radicalization of the Muslim community in this country is an issue that has to be confronted, has to be addressed. Start with one proposition, is that Al-Qaeda realizes it's very difficult, if not impossible, for them to launch a major attack against the United States from the outside. The defenses we've set up since September 11th have worked. It will be very, very difficult for them, if not impossible, to carry out a 9/11 type attack again. What they've done is they've adapted now, and they are recruiting from within. So we saw Zazi, who was going to be the subway bomber in New York. He was a guy who was raised in Queens, had a small business in Lower Manhattan, living in Colorado. But they brought him over to Afghanistan for training, totally under the radar screen. No one had any idea that he was involved in terrorism. You had Major Hassan, the Army major at Fort Hood, who murdered 13 people. You had Shahzad, the Times Square bomb, and there's other cases in Riverdale, in Jersey, in Baltimore, in Texas, Chicago, all at Portland, Oregon, all people below the radar screen living legally in this country. So there's a real attempt to recruit by a foreign enemy, recruit people in the country. Eric Holder, probably the most liberal attorney general we've had since Ramsey Clark over 40 years ago, has said that he lies awake at night worried that so many young Muslim men are being recruited to take up arms against their own country. And this other part of that component is, I don't believe, this is from talking to law enforcement officials throughout the country, I don't believe that the Muslim community cooperates enough with the police and law enforcement. I can give a few examples. In Minneapolis several years ago, Al-Shabaab, a Somali terrorist organization affiliated with Al-Qaeda, was recruiting young men to become suicide bombers. Families of the Somali community went to law enforcement, said they wanted this stopped. An investigation was begun. The imams in the mosques warned their people, told their people not to cooperate with the investigation. That's bad enough. I don't know of any Muslim leader in the country who denounced that. Similarly, we had a young man on Long Island who went to several mosques saying that he wanted to take part in jihad. The mosque, give credit for this, said we don't do jihad here, but never went to the police and said what he was trying to do. We had the Zazi case where the imam, the NYPD went to him. This imam who was cooperating asked him for information on the case. He tipped off the bomber. So these are just some examples. And so I want to have a hearing on the extent of the radicalization and the lack of cooperation, because I know the overwhelming majority of Muslims are outstanding Americans. I don't think they're being well served by their current leadership, and I think this should be brought out. You have stated that 80% of the mosques in the United States are headed by imams who espouse radical Islamic jihad. That's a high figure. You have evidence of that? I think I said they're radical extreme. Actually, where I got that from, there was a Sheikh Kabani who was head of a major Muslim organization in this country. This was actually during the Clinton years, before 9/11. The State Department held a forum, a seminar, a symposium on terrorism. He testified, and as a Muslim, he said that 80% or more of the mosques in America were controlled by radical imams, yes. And I haven't seen anything that would indicate that that number is wrong.
They've called you all kinds of names. They say bigotry, you're targeting just Muslims, only Muslims are going to testify. They're likening you to former Joe McCarthy, who was going after communists, and you're saying that this is all discriminatory against Muslims in this country. How do you respond to that?
Well, the fact is that this is a Muslim terrorist operation against the United States. I mean, if I was one of the only Republicans who, back in 1995, I was calling for an investigation of militias in this country because I thought they had become a threat. We're talking about an organized effort. We're talking about a group such as Al-Qaeda, a foreign enemy which has attacked the United States. We're at war with Al-Qaeda, and they're recruiting people from in this country, and they're recruiting from within the Muslim community. Obviously, not only are not all Muslims terrorists, the overwhelming majority of Muslims are not terrorists and don't support terrorism. But that's where the threat is coming from. So to me, I'd be remiss in my duty. And listen, let me make it ethnic. If you were trying to investigate the Westies, you'd be investigating the Irish American community. That's where they came from. So let's not kid ourselves.
People like Steve Emerson, who are security and terrorist experts, say that you're not planning on calling people like him to this, and they're very upset about that.
Yeah, I'm getting it from both sides. I have the, on the one hand, I'm being attacked for being anti-Muslim. Then some groups who are very critical of the Muslim community, they say that I'm caving into the Muslims. I'm caving in to groups such as CARE. Now, Steve Emerson is actually a friend, and I work with him. He was upset when I said I was not going to call him as a witness, because I believe these are going to be a series of hearings, but the first one, I would like to have it from people who actually live in the Muslim community, people who are Muslims themselves. That's the extent I can get these witnesses to talk about what's going on. That to me is a lot more believable than someone such as myself coming in from the outside. So it's, again, they're going to be very interesting hearings, and it's up to me to make sure they're done the right way, and they will be.
As chair of the Homeland Security Committee, this is a daunting challenge for you. Could you tell us, what is our state of preparedness today? How great is the threat against our country today for another terrorist attack?
Well, the threat is real. There are ongoing threats that we're concerned about all the time. Back at Christmas time, we had the air cargo coming in from Yemen. Really, not more than a few weeks goes by without having an arrest of some either cell or some lone wolf, if you will, some jihadist in this country who was planning an attack. So, no, this is real. And it's the good side of it is, because Al-Qaeda has been stopped from coming in from the outside, the terrorists we have are not as well trained as the 9/11 terrorists. That's the good part of it. The bad part of it is we don't know who they are. We don't know who they are because they're under the radar screen. It's like Shahzad at Times Square. I mean, there would have been hundreds of people murdered that night if that bomb had gone off, because we had no idea who he was. But he came in, he carried out the attack. Fortunately, because he was not well trained enough, the fertilizer he used was not sufficient to set off the bomb. If that had gone off, you would have had carnage in Times Square.